Just as I was about to walk down the aisle, Lorraine, my fiancé's mother, approached me. She stopped right in front of me, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. Then she leaned close to my ear, her voice soft but cold as steel. "You'll always be second in his heart. Know your place." I was stunned. That wasn't just an insult, it was a direct stab at my pride. I waited for her to laugh and break the tension, or at least give a sign that she was joking, but no. She just gave a smug smile, as if she had successfully taken me down. At that moment, Benjamin, my fiancé, walked in. I turned to him, hoping he'd realize something wasn't right, hoping he'd say something. But he didn't. He chuckled lightly, glanced at his mother, and said as if it were a harmless joke, "Mom's just being a little protective." I smiled too, but it was a different kind of smile, cold, sharp. Good, because I'm starting to be protective of myself too. He was taken aback. He wasn't used to seeing me react that way. And inside, I was ready for something else entirely. The first time I met Benjamin was at a glamorous fundraising gala in Chicago, where everyone was dressed formally and the lights sparkled in every corner of the room. I remember clearly how I felt entering that space, grand, beautifully decorated, yet strangely cold, like it wasn't a place meant for someone like me. I was a self-made lawyer with no connections or fate that had brought me to that event. It was all thanks to years of determined study and hard work. Benjamin entered like a wave that swept away all attention in the room. He was tall, composed, with sun-kissed skin and a warm smile, as if everything around him paused when he walked by. His eyes lit up, making me feel like he saw right into the deepest parts of me, my desires, my dreams I'd never dared to speak aloud. He was the perfect image of a man, charming, attractive, and incredibly confident. My first feeling was admiration, but also hesitation. He belonged to an elite, wealthy family, while I was a self-made woman with nothing but my own effort. We seemed to come from entirely different worlds. Yet, his charm was undeniable, and I knew, somewhere deep inside, I was drawn to him. We talked for a while, and I felt an immediate connection. However, right then, his mother, Lorraine, appeared like a shadow and pulled me out of Benjamin's attention. She was a cold, sharp woman who always looked at me as though I didn't belong. "It's quite impressive that you managed to graduate law school without someone pulling strings for you," she said with a sarcastic smile, her eyes dissecting every gesture I made. I felt the contempt in every word, as if she had already classified me as someone beneath her, unworthy of standing next to her family. Benjamin stood beside us, but didn't intervene to defend me. He simply smiled and spoke gently, as if it was nothing serious. "That's just how my mom is." His words felt strange to me, as if he was completely oblivious to the contempt his mother showed, or perhaps he had grown used to it. But I couldn't forget Lorraine's gaze, nor the way she tried to shatter my dignity. Still, I didn't let her affect me. I smiled and responded sweetly to Benjamin, but deep down, I felt the stark difference between us. I had believed that love would be enough, that it would bridge the gap between his world and mine. But slowly, I began to realize that life wasn't as simple as I had imagined. We could love each other, but could we overcome the differences in our backgrounds, in our families, in the expectations they placed on me? Though I didn't want to admit it, those questions had started to form in my mind, bringing a sense of unease I couldn't shake off. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in the hotel room, staring out the window at the brightly lit city skyline. It was a beautiful scene, yet I felt a heavy weight inside. Everything around me didn't feel like it belonged to me. It felt like I had wandered into someone else's film. This wedding wasn't my event. It was a production crafted by Benjamin's mother, Lorraine. Every detail of the ceremony was her design, from the luxurious venue at the Plaza Hotel to the elegant invitations and lavish fresh flowers. I was just the bride selected for the role, a part of the grand play she intended to stage. The feeling of being overlooked wasn't new to me, but today the exhaustion had reached its peak. I once believed that love alone would be enough, but now I realize that my love for Benjamin was just one piece of a much larger picture I had no control over. His mother had orchestrated everything, and Benjamin, though he loved me, didn't have the strength to stand up to her. As I sat in the room, one thought flashed through my mind. This isn't the life I want. What I wanted was an intimate wedding, where I could truly feel the love, where Benjamin and I could share this joy with the people closest to us. But instead, Lorraine had invited 800 guests, most of them people she wanted to impress with her family's wealth and power. Everything, from the invitations to each flower, was arranged to showcase her status. Then I saw them. At that moment, I was about to step out of the room for a short walk, to ease myself after such a tense day. But just as I reached for the door, I heard whispers from the hallway. I couldn't help but hear them, and I stopped in my tracks. It was Benjamin and his mother. They were standing close by, not even trying to conceal their conversation. I froze, my heart pounding. "How's everything going, Mom?" Benjamin asked, his voice calm but full of implication. Lorraine replied, her voice soft but clear, "Just a little more. Everything is going according to plan. This wedding will happen just the way we want." There was no mention of me, no excitement or concern for the big day, just cold words, as if I were an insignificant detail. A deep sense of unease rose within me. Why would his mother say that? Why did they want everything to go their way without any regard for me? This had long ceased to be my wedding. It was nothing more than a performance. I no longer wanted to be a passive participant. Tonight, I wouldn't wait any longer. These thoughts and feelings had been enough. The sense of being controlled, of being pushed aside, it had all reached its limit. So I began planning my own course. I couldn't continue accepting everything their way. I had the right to choose, the right to change things. And no matter how much money or power they had, they would have to face the truth. I had hired a private investigator. I needed the truth. What he uncovered didn't surprise me, but it still made my heart sink. Benjamin, the man I believed loved me completely, was seeing Sophie, his ex-girlfriend. The same woman his mother always wanted him to marry, the one Lorraine never tried to hide her support for. My phone was full of evidence. Pictures of them together, short audio recordings, flirtatious messages without any attempt at secrecy. Each message, each call made me feel like I was just a pawn in their game. One of the messages made me sigh in disbelief. "She's boring. Just a placeholder. I'm only waiting for the day I can be with you." That feeling of betrayal, I can't put it into words. I had believed I was worthy of Benjamin's love. But now, all I had was the raw, undeniable truth. And his mother, Lorraine, not only knew, but supported the affair. She had known everything and perhaps was simply waiting for the day I'd find out, so everything would unfold exactly as she planned. I could cancel the wedding right away. I would probably receive sympathy from everyone, and it would become a romanticized story with me as the heroine. But no, I didn't want to let them off that easily. I didn't want to become the victim in this story, the one everyone pitied. I didn't want Lorraine and Benjamin to comfortably carry on in their false little world. So I made my decision. I would expose everything at the one moment they least expected, at the most important time, when everyone believed I would walk down the aisle, radiant in my pure white wedding dress. But instead, I would make them face the truth. That night, I spent time alone in my room, thinking through my plan. Everything had to be precise. I couldn't let myself be pulled back into their game again. I couldn't allow myself to be a bystander while they continued to manipulate my life. I called a private investigator once more, asking him to send a few final documents. At this point, I didn't need more evidence. I just needed final confirmation that everything I knew was true. And I needed to prepare. I wanted everything to unfold perfectly, with no room for error. The next morning, I felt something strange. Everything was unfolding as planned, Lorraine and Benjamin, both eagerly preparing for the ceremony, full of anticipation. But inside me, I felt like a warrior preparing for her final battle. I was no longer the naive girl watching life pass her by. I had become the one in control. The night before the wedding, I stood before the mirror and asked myself once more, do I have the courage to go through with this? But the answer came to me immediately. Yes, I was ready. I wasn't just doing this for myself, but for everyone who had ever been hurt by deceit and betrayal. The next day, when all the guests had arrived, and everything seemed perfectly orchestrated according to Lorraine's vision, I walked down the aisle in a pure white dress that cost nearly $15,000, my high heels clicking quietly on the marble floor. Everyone around me was watching intently, and my expression was calm, unbothered, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Each step I took told a story no one could predict, and I knew that today, I wouldn't just be a bride, I would be the one ending a painful chapter of my life. When I reached the center of the aisle, I looked around. Every eye was fixed on me. His mother, Lorraine, sat in the front row with hope in her eyes. Benjamin stood tall, but I could see the anxiety creeping into his posture. They both believed I would be the sweet, obedient bride, walking toward her happily ever after. But today, I would show them something entirely different. Before reading the vows, I paused and turned to face the crowd. Everything around me fell still. I spoke, my voice soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. Before we begin, I'd like to share a little something. Immediately, the large screen behind me lit up. Text messages, photos, and videos of Benjamin and Sophie began to play one after another. There was no room for denial, no excuse to be made. I saw the shock on Benjamin's face, his eyes wide, his expression confused and desperate. Lorraine, whom I had thought nothing could ever surprise, sat frozen, her lips pressed tightly together. The room was silent, save for the sounds of Benjamin and Sophie's intimate conversations, unfiltered, uncensored, full of promises that were never meant for me. Benjamin turned pale, his steps unsteady as he tried to keep his balance. He couldn't meet my eyes. He knew it was over. Everything he had tried to hide was now laid bare at our wedding. In that moment, he looked like a completely different man, not the confident, charismatic figure I once loved, but a weak, trembling boy who couldn't justify what he had done. I turned to him, my gaze void of anger, filled only with cold clarity. "This is my wedding gift to you." I silently thanked myself for standing firm, for facing this betrayal without collapsing, for refusing to let them win. The room was still heavy with stunned silence as I released Benjamin's hand and walked out of the ceremony. I didn't look back, but I could feel the shocked stares, the whispers circling the room. And then, suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. Jake, Benjamin's best friend, stood up from his seat. His eyes were resolute as he spoke out loud. "Sophie isn't the only one. There are at least 3 more." His words hit like a thunderclap. The entire crowd froze, as if realizing something far greater than what I had already revealed. Jake's confession wasn't just hearsay. It was truth from someone who knew everything, someone who had witnessed what Benjamin had desperately tried to keep hidden. In that moment, Benjamin turned ghostly pale, his face graying with shame. He shouted, trying to deny it. "No, that's not true." "Jake, what are you saying?" His voice trembled, stripped of its usual confidence. He scrambled for explanations, but the truth was undeniable. Lorraine, his mother, stared at the screen, then back at me, her eyes filled with fury. She lunged toward me, her hands raised as if to slap me. But before she could get close, Jake stepped in swiftly. He stood between us, eyes locked with hers, unyielding. "She's not the one at fault. Don't do something stupid," Jake said coldly but firmly. I could feel the shift in Jake's tone. He was no longer the friend who used to cover for Benjamin's mistakes. That night, it seemed he too had finally had enough. Jake continued, "I'm tired of covering for someone who doesn't deserve it. Everyone in this room knows the truth, Lorraine included. But she was the only one brave enough to stand up and face it. I can't keep supporting a liar anymore." Jake's words landed like a blow to Benjamin's chest. He stood frozen, speechless, his head lowered. The people in the room began looking at him, not with admiration anymore, but with pity. A few began whispering, casting judgmental glances at both Lorraine and Benjamin. Lorraine tried to stay composed, but the fury and disappointment in her eyes were unmistakable. She hadn't expected everything to fall apart today, on the very day that was meant to be the crowning moment for her family. I stood there, no longer the fragile woman in a white dress dreaming of a fairy tale. I was stronger now, no longer afraid. I looked at Jake, grateful for his support, but I didn't let myself be drawn into any further conversation. The story was over, and now all I wanted was to leave all of these people behind, the ones I once trusted. Benjamin fell to his knees, his hands trembling as if trying to grasp onto the last scraps of his dignity, but his face was already soaked with tears. I was wrong. Please, give me a chance to make it right. His voice cracked, filled with desperate hope that I might still save him, but I no longer felt heartache or regret. It was all over. I looked at him, but there was no emotion left in my eyes. There's nothing left to fix, I answered coldly, each word striking his heart with no trace of mercy. And just then, the doors opened, and Sophie walked in, exuding confidence. Her eyes were bright, defiant. She wore a striking red dress, as if she hadn't just entered a room, but come to claim it, as if she knew she had won. She said nothing at first, simply walked up to me and held out a phone. He begged to see me last night. Here are the messages, Sophie said, her voice firm and unapologetic, with the certainty of someone who believed she had the upper hand. All eyes turned to Sophie and the phone in her hand. The messages lit up the screen, each word clear and pathetic. Damn it, I can't live without you. She could never be the one I love. Only you make me feel truly happy. Benjamin stood frozen, speechless. Every defense, every excuse he might have offered, dissolved in the air. He had thought he could deceive me, deceive everyone, but now the truth was laid bare. His words meant nothing anymore, shattered into worthless fragments. Lorraine, unable to contain her rage, stormed toward Benjamin like a hurricane. She screamed, her voice tearing through the silence. You idiot! You've ruined this family's name and everything we've worked for. You're a disgrace. She pointed at him, her eyes bloodshot. The proud, powerful mother figure was gone, replaced by a woman whose entire world had crumbled before her eyes. The perfect family she had spent years building had collapsed into ruins. I stood there, unshaken. Calm filled me. I sighed, not out of sorrow, but because I knew everything I had done was right. I had nothing to regret. Lorraine, Benjamin, they could scream, cry, and beg, but I no longer belonged to their world. The lies, the manipulation, I would bear it no more. Benjamin, in a voice barely above a whisper, reached out toward his mother. Mom. His tone was broken, full of remorse, but there was no one left to save him. He stood there pale, his eyes red, looking as though he wished he could vanish from the humiliation. Everything he believed was secure, everything he tried to preserve, was now in ruins. His apologies, his pleas, meaningless. I didn't look at him again. I only heard him calling for his mother, but inside, I felt nothing but cold detachment. I stepped closer, not facing him, but near enough that he could hear each word I said, soft but filled with conviction. You and your mother always thought I was beneath you. Now tell me, who's the pitiful one? I didn't need to see his eyes to feel the hollowness growing in his chest. He was wrong, and now he'd have to live with that truth forever. The price of deception and betrayal was far too high, and there was no longer any place in my life for people like him. Suddenly, the wedding hall doors burst open. A gentle breeze swept in, carrying with it the inevitable change. Every eye turned toward me. I didn't say another word. I simply hurled the bouquet straight at Benjamin. It flew through the air like a slap in the face to that fake family, a strike that rejected everything they had ever believed about me. Thank you, everyone. The wedding is over. My voice echoed through the vast room. I didn't need to explain or justify anything. I had said all that needed to be said. I had done all that needed to be done. The whispers and stunned stares began to swell around me, but I didn't care. I didn't look back. I left them no chance to reverse my decision. I walked away, unhurried, but full of pride, with every step sure and deliberate. I no longer felt fear or doubt. I had severed ties completely with the past, with the world they had tried to force on me. I walked past them like a warrior stepping through the ruins of a battle now finished. No regrets. No weakness. When I reached the door, I lifted my head high and didn't turn back, not even once. because I knew from now on, my life would no longer be dictated by people who weren't worthy. I was stepping into a new future, one I would craft on my own, free from control or judgment. I had walked out of their lives, nothing holding me back, nothing to regret. It was all over. After that, Benjamin was fired from his law firm. The news spread quickly through the legal community, and soon, his name became a punchline, a cautionary tale of failure and deceit. The community where he once built his reputation now offered only scornful glances and whispered gossip behind his back. He lost not just his job, but the respect he had once enjoyed. Everything he had spent years building had crumbled because of a few reckless choices and a complete failure in love and responsibility. Jake, the friend who had once stood by Benjamin, now came to find me. He invited me out for coffee, not to console me, not out of pity, but for a simple reason: no expectations, no strings. When I sat across from Jake in a small cafe, he looked at me with honesty. What I saw in his eyes wasn't pity, it was understanding. Jake didn't hesitate to say he had grown tired of witnessing everything Benjamin had done, and that he was genuinely glad I had chosen to stand up for myself, even if it meant walking away from what I once believed was mine. I smiled softly, saying very little. There was no need to explain. I had made my choices. I didn't need forgiveness from anyone. A few days later, I booked a solo trip to Rome. I had spent too long living in the shadow of a family I never belonged to, too long letting others dictate the direction of my life. Now, I needed a journey, a time to rediscover myself. The flight took me to Italy's capital, a city of ancient streets, incredible cuisine, and the Colosseum, an enduring monument to legendary stories. Rome, with its old world charm and haunting beauty, felt like a place where I could pause, where I could forget, at least for a while, all that had happened. I sat in a small Roman bar, the atmosphere warm and cozy, never too loud. The entire space seemed to melt into the gentle rhythm of jazz, mixed with the scent of coffee and the aroma of Italian dishes laid out on worn wooden tables. I was tired from the long flight, but inside, I felt a strange peace. I hadn't felt this in so long, this sense of freedom, of not being bound by family pressures, societal expectations, or unrealistic dreams. Somehow, Rome welcomed me like an old friend. Its cobbled streets, weathered walls filled with stories, and especially the Colosseum, stood like a symbol of resilience. I sat on a balcony, gazing at the sturdy columns of that great arena, and I felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself that I had lost. A strength I had abandoned long ago, back when I lived under the shadow of a family that was never truly mine. In front of me, a glass of Prosecco sparkled in the late sunlight. I took a sip, tasting its light sweetness, a hint of tartness, and a cool smoothness that refreshed me. I smiled softly, eyes fixed on the Colosseum, whose rough stone walls had borne witness to battles, betrayals, and mythic tales. But the most important thing was, those walls still stood. They didn't collapse with time. They only grew older, stronger, and more dignified. I asked myself, did the warriors who once stood inside the Colosseum ever feel the way I do now? Did they too face impossible trials, stare into a world full of deception, and yet somehow find a reason to stand tall and walk forward alone? I couldn't help but feel a kinship with those ancient fighters. They weren't chosen. They had no control over their fate. But in the end, they managed to write their own story. A gentle breeze passed through, carrying the scent of summer and the soul of this ancient city. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the peace of Rome wrap around me. All the worry, all the thoughts of the past, of Benjamin, of Lorraine, seemed to dissolve into the air. I no longer had to carry those burdens. This trip wasn't an escape. I wasn't running from them. I was running to myself. When I opened my eyes, the sun had begun to slip behind the old buildings, and light clouds drifted softly across the sky. I took another sip of Prosecco, savoring its gentle warmth. And then, a thought came to me, sudden and quiet, one that tightened my chest for a moment, but then somehow set me free. I spent years trying to prove I was worthy of their family. But the truth is, they were never worthy of me. The years I had spent seeking their approval, the exhaustion from living in a world built on lies, those were now behind me. No more Benjamin. No more his mother. No more expectations that were never mine to bear. I had spent far too much time trying to earn the acceptance of people who would never be capable of giving it. This journey was about reclaiming myself, about moving forward without looking back, without trying to please anyone. What I lost, I no longer needed to recover. All I needed now was freedom. Freedom to live my life on my terms. Freedom to find joy in simple things like a sip of Prosecco and a quiet moment facing the Colosseum, a symbol of resilience, of enduring strength. And as I looked again at the Colosseum, I no longer felt abandoned. I felt grounded, solid like those ancient walls. My life, from this moment on, would no longer be dictated by anyone else. I would be the one to decide. I would be the one to write the next chapter of my story.